Welcome to Moving Through and Beyond, a podcast dedicated to sharing inspired journeys of redefining life, vision, and purpose after immense hardship and grief. My goal with this podcast is to give you hope and to let my guest journeys inspire you to make the choice to keep looking up. I'm your host, Carey Conley. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for listening to this episode today of Moving Through and Beyond. I am so honored to get to actually really connect for the first time with a gentleman that I've been following for a very long time through mutual friends of ours. And Glenn, I just appreciate you being here so much today.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate you bringing me on.
Yeah, so I just want to read some of your bio, if that's okay, so that everybody can kind of get to know you a little bit, and then we'll just have a great conversation to learn a little bit about your background, if you don't mind. So Glenn has achieved a lot, my friends. Multifaceted entrepreneur, 25 years of success in the automotive industry, creator of the 800% Elite Automotive Club, sought-after motivational speaker and author, host of his own radio show entitled The 800% Club, and a morning show, I believe, too, right, Glenn, of Rise and Grind?
Correct.
Yeah. Creator of, and those of you who are on Clubhouse, you have to know that he is also the creator of the largest room there called Breakfast of Champions. Has triumphed through a lot of real trials that I want him to talk a little bit about, of being homeless and spending some time in prison. But I think probably you would say that your proudest thing is that you are the father of 8 beautiful children.
That's right. I got 8 babies.
That's incredible. But I know so how busy you are, Glenn. So again, thank you for being here today.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it truly is an honor. I appreciate you.
Yeah. So, tell us a little bit about first of all, where do you live, Glenn? Where are you?
I live in Lexington, Kentucky.
Okay. I thought you were on the East Coast somewhere.
Yeah. We're on Eastern time. And been here in Kentucky about 15 years or so. Right.
And so I know the automotive industry is where you have spent a good space of your time as an entrepreneur. So tell me how you got into that.
Yeah. So automotive came from, I was working at an AOL call center. All right. Do you know what AOL is? You know what
well, I briefly, yes.
Yeah.
A little bit.
America Online. So you used to have to pay to be able to browse the internet, right? You had to have a paid browser. And so America Online, I worked at a call center there. And we would call people that had canceled, that hated AOL, and we would have to convert them to take another free trial so we could get them back into the system. And I was doing that for a while. Met a young lady that lived below me. Her and I started dating. She got pregnant with my first child, and I knew I had to get out of there. I wasn't going to make enough money to raise a kid. And so I was looking for a job, saw an ad in the paper, said make $5,000 a month guaranteed. And I was like, yeah, dude, I can handle that. And so I went and did an interview at Planet Nissan Subaru dealership in Flagstaff, Arizona. And they hired me on the spot, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Wow. So I'm actually, the studio that I'm sitting in is in Arizona. And so
okay, nice.
I didn't know that you spent some time here. It's in Scottsdale in the Biltmore area. Yeah.
Yeah, very nice.
Yeah. I lived here for about 7 years and moved to Oklahoma City 2 years ago to be near my daughter and my 2 little grandchildren. So I go back and forth. But I didn't realize that you had some history here in Arizona.
Oh, yeah. I grew up, I was in Flagstaff for 23 years.
Oh, wow. Mm-hmm. All right. So went into automotive sales. So prior to that, Glenn, what were you doing before you started doing AOL and getting into the automotive industry?
Yeah, before that, I was just a baby. I was like college. And this was when I got into automotive when I was 20 years old. Had my oldest daughter, number 1 of 8. That same year, right, when I was 20. So prior to that, I was just, being a kid. I had a full ride scholarship to Northern Arizona University. I blew that in the first year. Prior to that, I was a high school kid, but my brain was always very, very smart, but I did a lot of dumb things along the way, hanging out in pool halls till 3:00 in the morning. Just, I was just, I was a little bit of a rebel back then in those early days, getting in and out of trouble.
It's so interesting to me. Recently, I've been meeting a lot of gentlemen like you that super successful, very connected to some awesome people like you and I, that I learned their backstory of their childhood and their upbringing and what they went through and how rebellious they were and all the trouble that they got into. It's just interesting to me, especially for men, how they were able to get through that and then transition and create so much success in life.
Well, I think it's interesting. Two things. One, this is why our school system today, isn't really working the way that it was designed to work. It's because it's not a one size fits all. And, I was very intelligent. I had no problem understanding the concepts. The way that I was taught is what I bucked against. Sitting in classrooms for hours was not my thing. So I would ditch class and then just show up and take the test and ace the test, right? Like I had a different ability to learn, and the schools didn't really want to cater to that because not their fault, right? They got one teacher for 30 students. They just can't. So that's part of the problem with that. But then also on the other thing that you noted, it's the survivors that are here to tell the stories, right? And so it seems like, going through all this dark stuff leads to great things. It's kind of what it feels like on the surface because we can only hear the stories from those that made it. I have a lot of friends that went through a lot of the things I went through and didn't make it out on the other side, and they're not here to tell their stories. So I tell people all the time, the stuff that I went through, obviously it was a part of who I am today and it helped build who I am today, but I wouldn't wish it on anybody. I was lucky. I was blessed. God pulled me out. I could have been dead or in jail. That's what the path looked like. I was going to be dead or in jail, and I'm not. But I do understand that I'm a rare percentage that's been able to make it through all the things that I experienced and have the success that we have now. So,
was there a single moment, Glenn, where you can pinpoint where you made that choice to go this way versus this way?
Yeah, it wasn't really a choice. Like I made a choice to end my life. That was the choice that I made. I was homeless. So fast forward, I did the automotive thing for a while, and then I lost custody of my oldest daughter when she was 6. And I blamed everybody but me, even though I was clearly a big part of the problem. But I had this victim mentality. And so I traveled around, lived down in Phoenix for a little while, Scottsdale for a little while, right off Scottsdale Road in the 202. And then from there, moved to Southern California, burning bridges all along the way, and ultimately ended up homeless in San Diego, California. And that homelessness really led to hopelessness. When you're homeless, people think it's rough, because you don't have money or a car or a place to sleep. But really, it's rough because you become invisible. People won't make eye contact with you when you're homeless. And it's a natural, they don't know if you're going to mug them, ask them for money, make them feel uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable. The whole homeless thing is an uncomfortable thing for everybody involved. And so people just don't make eye contact. And once you feel invisible, like no one sees you, for me, in my experience, that I started to lose hope, which became a deep depression. The depression became suicidal thoughts. And I basically reached a point in my life where I felt like the most loving thing that I could do would be to take my own life, because I knew my mom was staying up at night worried about where her homeless son was every night. I knew that my sister was embarrassed that her brother was in and out of jail all the time, right? So I know sometimes, the suicide thing is hard to understand, but really it was a place of love. I felt like I was doing an action out of love for my mom and for my sister, for my family. And so I chose to drown myself in the Pacific Ocean. I'm not a very good swimmer. And so I swam out as far as I could until I was completely exhausted, and experienced this knowing that this was the last breath that I was going to take on this planet. And I went under the water, and then all of a sudden my feet hit the ground. The tide had been pushing me back in. I was trying to swim out, but I wasn't even strong enough to get out past the tide. And so the tide pushed me in, rolled me up on the ocean. And I was a non-believer at the time. I didn't believe that we were spiritual beings at all. And in that moment, laying there on the beach, looking up at the stars, God spoke to me and he said, you take yourself wherever you go. And when I heard those words, I had heard them before from like a mentor, but I never really understood what they meant, right? Because in my 20s, I knew everything, right? And I thought I knew everything. And so it said, you take yourself wherever you go. And that's when I realized I'd lived in different cities, different states, been around different people, had different jobs, but the result continued to be exactly the same, right? There was only one constant, Glenn Lundy. That was the only constant in every single one of those terrible situations in my life. And so once that like hit me, that was a moment that hit me. And I thought, well, if I'm the creator, directly responsible and involved in all of the bad things in my life, does that mean I have the ability to create good things in my life? And if the answer is yes, where does that ability come from? How do I have this ability? And so those two questions led me on a new journey filled with ups and downs and mistakes and wins and successes, but ultimately continuing to progress forward. Went on a spiritual journey, studied a bunch of different religions, so on and so forth. Ultimately found my way to spiritual connection and understanding through Jesus and the Christian religion. But that moment, it wasn't, the choice that I made was to end my own life. And then God had a different plan for me.
I have never heard you share that whole story, Glenn. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah,
it's a beautiful story. And you have to know, and I know you know this, that people were praying for you.
Yes.
God answered prayer and said, yeah, I have big plans for you, Mr. Lundy, and this is what we're going to do. So thank you.
No doubt.
Yeah. You have to know, Glenn, because of my story that I've shared with you, I get so many people reaching out to me, parents mostly really concerned about their kids.
Yeah.
I'm getting ready, as a matter of fact, to launch a community for young adults because I'm very focused on what's happening with our kids and our young adults right now.
Sure.
It's scary.
It
Most
is
of them
scary.
it is. I agree with you that our school system, I have 2 grandsons now.
Right.
I don't know what my daughter's planning on doing with schooling for them, but it just scares me for them to go through the school system the way it is. So I appreciate you sharing that. And
yeah. And like I said, I appreciate the teachers. I appreciate all of the intention behind
of course,
the heart behind school. It's just, it's an antiquated system that really needs an update and an overhaul to become more individualized. And my hope is with AI tools and new technologies that we're able to create an individualized experience for these students. Really.
sure.
Yeah.
How are you educating your 8 kids then, Glenn?
Yeah. So my wife homeschools. My oldest daughter's 24, so she's out in the workforce, but the 7 that are in my house are 14. My daughter will actually be 14 this weekend and down, right? 14 all the way down to 2. And so we're in a position where my wife's able to stay home and she homeschools all of the babies. We live out on 10 acres, about 15 miles out of town. And so my kids kind of live in their own little world. They do all the extracurriculars like basketball and dance and tumbling and soccer and right. They do all that, and they've got friends in the neighborhood and stuff, so that they're not like isolated. But for the most part, they have no clue what the majority of people their age are experiencing. Like our kids don't have phones, they don't have access to social media. Things like that. And some people say, that's dumb. It's the way of the future. You got to teach them how to use this stuff. And I'm just like, you know what? I just want them to be kids for as long as humanly possible, know the Lord, know how to be kind to one another, know some manners, and they can figure out the rest of the stuff once they're out of my house.
Yeah. That's funny.
So I don't know if it's wrong or right, but that's what we're doing.
Yeah, that's great. So with the kids, Glenn,
yeah,
because I do again get so many parents reaching out to me saying, I have a child that's struggling. I don't know what to do. How should I communicate? How should I help? Do you have any thoughts around that, especially with your background and what you went through?
Yeah, so my oldest daughter and I, we don't have the strongest relationship. We spent 8 years not know, I wasn't in her life for 8 years from age 6 to age 14. And then she came back into my life, and here I am. I've got all these kids, and now I'm a good dad where I wasn't before. And so she's got a lot of jealousy and why were you a good dad to them but not to me, right? So like her and I deal with a lot of that, and she battles with depression. She's had to go to different places, mental health type places to help her out, and she seems to be much healthier now here at 24. And so I'm definitely not an expert at them older ages. I've made my mistakes with my daughter, and we're going through those challenges, and it's really, really hard. It's so hard because on one hand, I don't want to enable her. I want her to learn some lessons. But at the same time, there's always that thing in the back of your head that she's going to make a permanent decision, and a lot of her friends have, a lot of young people, that I know, have made that decision. And so it's tough. So the only thing I can say is with the little kids that we have in our house, there was a sermon that I listened to from TD Jakes. TD Jakes is just an incredible guy. And he said, our job as parents is to identify the seed that is in them and then fertilize that seed, right? So instead of me trying to get my kids to do the things I think they should do, or that I become the people I want them to be instead, or have them be like their dad and not make mistakes dad made, instead of doing that, I just really invest time in who they are as an individual and allow those seeds to sprout, right? Like Savannah is a leader. She likes to choreograph. She loves to travel. She's not going to go out in the yard and get her hands dirty. Like that's not her style, right? So I bring her to work with me a lot. She's going to Italy with me next week. Like we do those things together because that's where I seem to get an ROI when she's in those types of spaces. My son Joel, on the other hand, dude, he loves to be covered in mud. The kid won't wear shoes for nothing, right? So he gets the majority of the workload around the house. But that's because he finds joy in that, right? That's his seed. That's the role that he likes. Willow is an artist, so we've got murals on her wall, and we let her paint and make a mess. And she likes to touch on everything that's sticky and everything that's not sticky and everything in between. And we don't necessarily. I'm not an artist. I don't get it. Like I don't understand how her brain works at all. But I just try to fuel the individualism that exists in each one of these kids. Because it's much easier for us to treat them like a pack, right? Because we do have so many kids. And my daughter, Savannah, about 4 or 5 years ago, she told, I guess 3 years ago, she told us one time, because we pulled all the kids in and said, you guys, nah, 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 nah. And she pulled us aside and she was like, look, I had nothing to do with that. Like you're reprimanding all of us, but I had nothing to do with that, right? And she's like, you guys do this all the time. You treat us as a group when I'm an individual. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. You're right. So that would be my only suggestion to parents is just do everything that you can. I know sometimes it's convenient for us as parents to loop them into what we've got going on in our world, or to try to make things more convenient and easier on ourselves, where I believe you just got to pour into that individual and let them be whoever they are, like it or not. Right? You ain't got to like it. They're not yours forever anyway. Like they're going to move out one day and they're going to make their choices. So that's what I suggest. Pour into the seed of who they are.
So good, Glenn. I preach on this all the time. I found a woman, and you probably know her, Dr. Shefali Sabari. I've been on Oprah many, many times. She's a big deal in the conscious parenting world. And what she talks a lot about is not raising humans to become what you wanted to become, not put your stuff on them, or, live your life through them. And I think that's so hard for parents who maybe did not feel like they achieved on their own to not, live that through their kids.
Sure.
So hard. And,
It is.
coupling
It's
that.
challenging.
Yeah, it is challenging. And then you couple that with, again, an educational system that is wanting them to get the best grades, go to the right schools. I think what's happening, and I talk a lot about this. So my son was 25 when he took his life, and there's lots of reasons for that. But I saw so much of the pressure on him when he came out to get the right job, get the great title, and all of those things are such a heavy responsibility on a young adult. And at that moment, a lot of them are just getting the job and looking around a year later, Glenn, going, so this is it? Like,
right.
And then they don't know what to do to get out of it. And there's so much pride wrapped around it or fear of making the wrong choice that they just stick with it.
Well, the indoctrination starts young, right? Like if you think about it, the first thing they teach you in kindergarten is to stand in line and follow the leader. It's the very first thing they teach you. Stand in line, follow the leader. Then you play games like Simon Says, where they say Simon says, and you're supposed to repeat whatever they say. You're supposed to do whatever they say, and if you don't, you're out, right? They start teaching us this stuff in kindergarten, to be a follower, to follow the system, to listen to and respond to authority, to not think creatively. Like as you continue to go through our current school system, if you get the answer but you don't do it the way they want you to do it, you're wrong. They tell you you're wrong. Big red X, right? So there's no room for creativity. It's you follow the leader, you follow the order, you do as we say, and then they spit you out into this dog-eat-dog world, which is now over just the last 15 years, right? I didn't have a smartphone till I was 30 years old, right? And that was 15 years ago. So just in the last 15 years, now these kids, they've been indoctrinated with this whole follow the leader type thing and been told they have to go through a certain system to be successful. And then they're watching the highlight reels online of all the people making the money, driving the cars, doing the things, working the job, blah, blah, blah. All this massive success, ridiculous numbers, right? Millions and millions and millions and millions and millions, things that we never had access to when we were kids. And so it's like, okay, well, I got to do what they're doing because I've been taught to follow the leader, but I don't know how to do that, right? Like, and my world doesn't look like this world I'm seeing online. So clearly I'm the problem. Clearly I'm a failure. Clearly I'm not worthy. Clearly I'm not good enough, right? And when you're 20, you feel like you know everything. And my oldest daughter, she has said this to me many times. She's like, Dad, if I don't, then I will never, right? If I don't get into this school, I'll never get this job. If I don't pass this class, I'll never do this. If I don't X, I will never. And she believes that never, right? Like this one decision. I'm like, honey, you ain't gonna figure nothing out for another 15 years. Trust me. And then at that point, you might start to figure a thing or two out. Like your dad's just now figuring stuff out at 45. Like, but they really do have this belief system that they need to know it all at 20, and that the decisions they make at that point are going to determine the rest of their existence on this planet. And it's really tough to break through that.
Yeah. I found an organization a while back, connections to, it's called CASE, Community Alliance for Youth Success. It's co-founded by Stedman Graham, who I've had the honor to meet and have him on the podcast. And nice. What they have created over the past 10 years, Glenn, is a curriculum that they're bringing into the schools to teach the kids about vision, purpose, why they matter. I'm also now aligned with another organization called Generation Y in Oklahoma City that they're also doing the same thing. So there are people going into the schools trying to, talk to the kids about finding their own path, knowing that they can create whatever they want to create in their life. It's just it's an uphill battle, because we're still fighting, everything we just talked about and what you were just saying about you've got to follow this path. And so I got to go into, they hosted a huge event last spring where they brought in several speakers like me. I talked to, my area of expertise is teaching people how to have a vision for their life. So I went in and got to be one of their co-facilitators for the day. And the one thing the kids told me the most, Glenn, is that they were so afraid of making any decision in any direction because that's where they were going to be stuck for life.
Right.
And that if they changed direction, they were a failure.
Right.
And I'm 61 years old, Glenn. And like you just said, I said to them, guys, I'm 61 and I know my purpose, but I still make changes along the way.
Right.
Yeah. It's just hard for them to think that they have to have it all perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine.
problem.
Like, I'll like, I'll just share this with you, and I don't. I guess you can edit if you need to edit or whatever. But I remember being 13 years old, and one of my buddies got a like a Playboy magazine, and I remember seeing a woman's breast for the first time at 13 years old, and my little brain just like popped. Right? It just exploded. It was the first time I was exposed to anything like that. I'm like, what is this? This is crazy. Right? And I remember that moment. And I think about these kids, what they are exposed to at such an early age. I can't even fathom between the violence in the video games, the stuff they see on, like, it just, I can't even fathom what that's doing up here to scramble the perception. And I can see why now they feel this race to the end, right? Because they've been dealing with adult stuff already for 20 years when they're 25 years old, right? Where I was just this innocent little thing, like starting to make some mistakes. Like, I didn't drink alcohol for the first time until I was in college. Like, that just wasn't a thing. So I don't know, man. I'm glad that there's people in your circles that are trying to pour into the youth and help them understand that it really is a journey of pivots and shifts, and that's okay to explore and to experience. And you don't have to be at this level, and don't compare yourself to anybody else, and take your time exposing yourself to the things that are in this world, right? Like, my daughter will dig deep into everything, news, politics, wars, all this stuff. I'm like, dude, go play a video game or something. Like, be a kid, like, just be a kid. So I love that they're doing that. And I appreciate you sharing that with me, because that gives me a little bit of a ray of hope. I just look at our system and I look at what these kids have to deal with. And I just think, man, if that was me, I don't think I don't know.
I had no idea that we were going to go in this direction in this conversation, Glenn, but I'm so glad we did, because there's so many people, especially people who follow me because they know my story, reaching out and asking, okay, how do I help my kids? How do I help my young adults? So the one thing that I would love for you to share is when you decided to go in the direction of creating a life for good.
Yeah.
What were some of the very first steps that you could offer as advice to somebody who's maybe at that point right now, Glenn, or to a parent who is seeing somebody struggle with that? What were the first few steps that you took?
So I think the first thing, for me is I really had to shift my language, because our words have so much energy and so much power. I didn't realize it, right? I'll give you an example. I myself used to say, and I've heard a lot of people say, I am going to invest in the stock market. And when they invest in the stock market, they're expecting what? A return, right? A return on the investment. I hear people say, I'm going to invest in my business. They expect a return. I hear people say, I'm going to invest in myself. They expect a return. And then I'll hear that same person, or I used to be that same person, that would say, I'm going to spend time with my kids. I'm going to spend time with my spouse. I'm going to spend time on vacation. That word spend has a negative connotation to it. If you spend $5 out of your account, you got $5 less, period. If you invest $5, you expect to get a return. And so I shifted that word spend to the word invest, right? And little shifts in our language when we talk with our children, when we talk with ourselves, when we talk with our spouses or whoever, when we're communicating, little shifts in language end up having these long-term trickle effects where the world around you starts to shift, right? So I started by changing my language from negative connotations to positive connotations, changing my language from victim mentality to I am responsible for the results. I think it's also really important that people are challenged to explore their spirituality. I lived as a non-believer that we were just mind and body, right? Like that was it. No spirit aspect, with a very Darwinistic approach on life. And it wasn't until I was exposed to the idea that we could be more, and I began to question that, that then I started gaining a moral fiber and also feeling not contained by that moral fire, but actually like expansive because of it, right? There was so much more I could do. So I think the language that we use is important. I think a spiritual understanding, or at least the opportunity to explore things spiritually, and not like, hey, you got to do it this way because this is how I did it and it is the only way. But like, hey, go explore this idea of spirituality. You know, I studied Scientology, I studied Buddhism, I studied Islamic, right? I studied Catholic and Baptist and Christian and all these different things. And it was through those studies was able to gain that understanding. And so change the language, tap into the spiritual side. And I think probably most importantly, the biggest thing that I've done in my life, that I have my kids do, that my wife does, is we start every day and we end every day with gratitude. You know, I write my gratitudes, 10 gratitudes every morning, and we end every night as a family. Everyone goes around the room and says one thing that they're thankful for from that day. And starting and ending our day with gratitude has been a game changer in every aspect of my life.
So good, Glenn. I could talk to you forever. Such good advice.
Well, thank you.
And I'm going to take all of this home to my grandchildren, my daughter, because, you know, we've got a 3-year-old. Her 3-year-old is very big emotions.
Yes, yes.
He's got a lot of energy. And we think the 7-month-old is going to be a little bit more chill. But, you know, it's interesting to see the different dynamic. But they're very aware and much more conscious parenting than I was in my generation. So I appreciate you sharing this advice and everything that you're doing in this world. You're all over the place, Glenn. I do follow you.
Oh, thank you.
So what is the best place for people to follow you?
Oh, you know, actually the best way for us to interact is if you go, I wrote a small little ebook called The Morning 5 Simple Steps to an Extraordinary Life. And just things that you can do if you change the way you start your day and make a massive impact in your life. And so I love to start relationships by being able to give something to someone that they might be able to make an impact in their life. And so go to themorning5.com, download the free ebook, and then tells a little more of my story, also gives those 5 steps. And if you feel compelled, then let's connect deeper after that. And obviously we're on Instagram and Facebook and all those places.
Yeah. Thank you, Glenn. Again,
Yeah,
I know
of
how
course.
busy you are, so I appreciate your time here today. Such great stuff. And I want to thank everybody for listening to this episode today. I'm Carey Conley, your host of Moving Through and Beyond, and I want to just keep reminding you to keep looking up. If you found this episode inspiring or helpful, please share it with a friend or a family member. In order to be successful on this mission, I can't do it alone. Connect with me at www.careyconley.com, and don't forget to sign up for my weekly Do It On Purpose newsletter. Let's build this life-giving vision movement together to end this epidemic, save lives, and create purpose.